All right, let's see. I'm back. I'm recording and it's just me. I was just looking through as I logged on to record. I record these in Riverside and I was just looking, and it's been since May that I've recorded a podcast episode by myself. It is now October of 2025, and I just decided I'm going to get back in and riff a little bit. And the why that it's been a while since I've recorded anything solo is that, some of you who might be listening might know that I was in the space with my girlfriend, my sister, Vanessa Bennett, and we were sort of deciding if we were going to bring back Cheaper Than Therapy, the podcast that we did for few years, many years, I don't know, 4 years together. And if it made sense to sort of revamp it. And we decided not to, in its previous iteration, bring it back. A lot of that sort of having to do with, my relationship with clinical therapy and if that's sort of the work that I'm feeling called to be doing right now. And also just the time capacity stuff, and that when you are doing a podcast together, it's sort of like you commit to regularly recording and all of the things that are required to put a podcast like Cheaper Than Therapy together, whereas with this it's just sort of me when I am able and have the capacity and something is alive. So I'm going to try that for a bit, coming back to what's my 100% and recording when I feel called and when I feel like there's something alive that I want to talk about. And I just got back from teaching a weekend at Kripalu in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. If you've never been to Kripalu, I cannot say enough amazing things about that place in the world. The team, it was fall, so just like walking around through the leaves as they've fallen and crunching around, it was just a really beautiful weekend. And the group that was there was also so beautiful, and we just had the best time and conversations. The weekends are hard for me because I feel like they're a little quick and I want a little bit more time for us to dive in and play. And as I was flying back last night, I saw some things that just really sort of were weaved into some of the conversations we were having in the group, and the ways that I really am seeing a disconnect in terms of what I believe a lot of people aren't naming about relationship dynamics and how they're changing. And it's really funny, you guys, because a couple months ago, was like, I don't feel like I want to be a couples therapist anymore. And I was talking in one of the groups that I facilitate, and it's a group on love and relationships. It's like the Sovereign Love group in what is now Vanessa's community, the Inner Compass community, which is, if you want to come join us in there, it's a beautiful community where there's all kinds of coaches and therapists and people riffing on different topics. And so I do a couple groups a week on love and relationships, but also one on like our soul tending work and how we reclaim these aspects of ourselves that we've been culturally conditioned to turn away from. And so this was in the love group, and I was saying, I honestly, I don't know if I want to be a couples therapist anymore, not because I don't love working with couples and working with people on relationship dynamics, but there's just so much about what we understand couples therapy to be, and sort of the premise and the point and what the goal is, that's just really not, if I'm frank, in alignment with my values and what I believe in terms of what we're meant to be doing and evolving into as souls, and sort of how the trajectory of the human race is shifting right now. And it matters with relationships so much because there's nothing that is more activating to our pain points where wounding comes to the surface more than our most intimate relationships, and certainly familial relationships. I certainly think that's true of our friendships, but when it comes to romantic love, as we all know, I often joke it's like the kryptonite for all of us. I don't care how much work we've done or how much we feel like we, just like are really strong in our sense of self. Romantic love will often be the mirror that sort of asks us to question like what is truly in alignment with who we want to be, and when we feel inevitably activated, as we will, because it is the most vulnerable thing in the world to attempt to see another person and be seen and say, can you love me? Can you be in this space of, continuing to choose me? And that choose me thing is a big thing because it's loaded. And so all of this background I'm giving on what came up for me this weekend, and you guys have to excuse me, I'm a little bit stuffed, I guess, from travel, I think. But what came up this weekend and then what I saw on a plane was really something that I think is often a disconnect that I want to talk about around women and motherhood, and what I think shifts in motherhood that shifts in relationships at that point of, I won't even just say motherhood, when we become parents, that I think there's a real disconnect for me in the way that men and women see this. And so I want to have a little bit of a conversation around the way that we're socialized around gender and children. Now, here's what ended up. Well, here's my friend Millie. Some of you know Millie, who is astro consciousness and just like the most brilliant intuitive astrologer. And she and I have just been talking a lot about this thing of, as the feminine consciousness in all of us is rising, what it's really asking us to do is get really clear on what is the truest, most authentic life that I desire for myself. And I would say I desire this for myself more than likely because it's in alignment with what my soul came here to do at this moment in history, to participate in some of the collective awakening of consciousness that I believe is happening. And so if there are things that I truly desire for whatever reason, and it may not be known to me yet, it may be sort of a process that's unfolding that I have to trust in, but for whatever reason, that's a part of my soul's path, my soul's mission, and I would say how I am uniquely qualified to be of service to the collective in this moment. Now, why that matters, right? So we've been talking about this in terms of what this means for women. And there's a way that what I started to think about as I was writing my last book, I'm working on a book right now, so this has been really alive in terms of the things that I'm thinking about and writing about. But as I was looking back at the history of some of these patriarchal paradigms that we've been living in for a very long time, and the way they were formed and how that is shifting, what I think we have not had a lot of honest conversations around was women are the beings, the entities that create life, that produce life. And so if men have a desire to have a family and have children, what is required, maybe not in terms of like technology or adoption, and this is certainly shifting, and it'll be interesting to see how this shifts, but at one point a woman was required, right? And there's a way that what we've never really talked about was there's a time when these patriarchal frameworks were formed that, very similar to the way that human beings were property when we're talking about enslaved people, that was the case for women as well. And that you got a plot of land and you got a wife, and women were sort of asked to comply with a nuclear family framework structure, so that, we could have their feminine ability to create life. And if they would not comply, they were harmed in many cases. And what I think is really interesting about the Salem witch trials, when we go back and look at that period of time, is that, we are conditioned to think, or maybe we were taught, that that was about women being accused of witchcraft, and that is why they were harmed or burned alive. But that's not actually the truth of the why. The why was these were women who were property owners, who were either widowed or for whatever reason had inherited land. And it was really a land grab. And so it was their neighbors and people who were attempting to acquire their land, accusing them of witchcraft as a way to sort of, excuse me, take control of their resources. And again, why this matters is because it becomes the origin point, not only of so much of this sort of internalized understanding that my role is to be a part of this nuclear family framework, that I am sort of for my utilitarian value as someone who can produce life, that is intertwined not only with my self-worth, but also my safety, and the extent to which we have sort of continued to perpetuate the villainization of women who, for whatever reason, choose not to participate in motherhood, or, and this is a big one, in any way sort of speak to either the desires they have for themselves in their lives beyond motherhood, or that motherhood was not an authentic desire that they had within themselves, but was very much part of their societal programming or the way that, life played out and they became mothers. And to say that, honestly, is something that I would argue still women are deeply vilified for. Drink a little coffee. I should have some water here, but, and so all of this came up for me because my friend Millie, as I'm going to do a little bit circling back and forth. You guys hopefully will track me, but she sent me a clip, or a post that was about, someone sort of in defense of Ayesha Curry. I hope I'm saying her name right. I'm not a big basketball fan, you guys. Please forgive me, those of you who are basketball fans, if I'm saying her name wrong. And her husband, Steph Curry, is someone who, is a very successful basketball player. And she went on the podcast Call Me Daddy. And I since went back and looked at some clips. I didn't listen to the whole podcast, but I listened to a bunch of clips from the podcast where she was talking about how when she fell in love with Steph, her husband, she had no idea that he was going to become this NBA star that he has become. He talked about being a high school basketball coach, and she really fell in love for him. And that she never had a desire to be a mother. I think she said shortly after they were married, she became pregnant with her first child. I think, again, I'm not that familiar with them and their lives, but I believe they have 4 or 5 children. I'd have to double check, but she has at least 4 children, I believe. And she was talking about how, being a mother was not something she actually desired for herself, and that as always has to be the caveat, as if this is like these two things cancel one another out. She very much loves and is committed to motherhood and her children, and she wanted a career for herself. She had all of these different desires for her life, right? Now, what was fascinating and what my friend Millie was pointing out to me in the conversation we were having was, if you go to her page, since she has had this conversation on the podcast, the level of, and I'm just going to say, vile attacks and ways that people have, come for this beautiful young woman. And I say young because I think she's in her mid 30s, but she has 4 or 5 children. So she started having children very young. Because I would say her old child looks around like 10 years old to me. So this woman in her mid 30s sort of reflecting, this is my life and there are things that I long for beyond motherhood. And that I didn't really want to be a mother. That wasn't like the dream for my life. And so I'm still sort of pursuing my dreams and making those dreams come true. The extent to which people were just feeling entitled to say horrific things to her in her comment section. And all of these things like, she's for these streets. What kind of woman would say that? And here's the thing that I saw most frequently in the comments. how could you go out there and embarrass your husband's stuff by saying that on that podcast, which I was fascinated by, that it is embarrassing to your husband for you to be honest about the felt experience of what you desire for yourself, and that as life for many of us plays out, as life plays out, I can still reflect on the fact that I'm not saying I don't want to be a mother, love being a mother, love my children, but that the authentic desire within me to be a mother was not actually there. Here's what I want to name for so many women. That is a truth that I think it has not been safe in society to speak, even as mothers. I know I've been open and vocal about my ambivalence around motherhood, in that I was married for like 9, almost 10 years. Like I was married for a very long time in resistance to becoming a mother. For me, most of the narrative was around me telling myself that I really loved my life and wanted to have a lot of freedom that I didn't experience, sort of being correlated with motherhood. But, what I since understood once I made the decision to have my child was that in a lot of ways I was scared of that level of vulnerability, because there is nothing more vulnerable than loving your child the way that you do. It's a relationship that has completely taught me more about love than I could have conceivably known that I could know about love until this little boy came into my life. There is nothing in my life, in my world, that is more sacred than my son. A lot of why I don't speak about him, in social media and in a lot of the work that I do, very often I don't post about him anymore like I did in the early days, is because he is such a sacred relationship in my life. And I'm really protective of that, right? And the big and is, as much as that little boy is the absolute treasure of my heart, the honest truth of the matter is, I understand what Aisha Curry is saying. And I think that is, one, true for so many more women than society really makes space for women to be honest about. But two, that as a therapist, what I have worked with in clients for many years is the result of the felt experience of mothers who either didn't really want to be mothers or had unspoken resentment about the unbelievably large task and responsibility that motherhood, especially in a nuclear family structure, is for women, and how much you can absolutely love your child, period, and not love being a parent or a mother, period. I think our society really struggles with what Jung called the tension of the opposites and multiple truths existing at the same time. And my child, again, treasure of my soul. And if I were not in a co-parenting situation where I have a great deal of time to myself and time to, as an introvert, recoup some of my energetic resources, which these are, again, things that nobody talks about, the felt experience of parenthood for people who can feel really energetically overwhelmed in the space of being present with other people all the time. Some people need more time alone to charge their battery. It's just facts of how human beings are different. And as a mother, the felt experience of how much the energetic requirement of you is when you have a child was challenging for me early on. And in the early years of motherhood, again, it was a really confusing time for my psyche, because as much as I was like in love with this little boy in a way that I didn't know I could ever feel love, it was probably the most depressed I've ever felt in my life, because energetically not having the time to, first of all, make sense of the cataclysmic shift in your psyche that occurs when you shift from the paradigm and the archetype of maiden to mother. the way that our societal structure has set it up in this nuclear family structure, there's just not a lot of time for that unless you have an incredible amount of resources, an incredible amount of support. And even then, I would argue that child is still so energetically in need of its mother that it can feel really, really challenging to sort of have the time to reorganize and stabilize and understand who you are and what is happening in terms of a death rebirth cycle for you, right? So none of these things are named. These are just things that, like, if you can't do this in an easeful way, if it's not easy for you, or if there are ways that you're struggling with this felt sense of your reality, I think society really villainizes women still. And if they're not villainized, they're pathologized. Like, there's something wrong with you. You have postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. And while those things may be true, I do think the why underneath them is not something that we've been curious enough about societally. And a lot of times that is that we were not meant to do this in a vacuum of two people raising a child. I think energetically, in one of my favorite books, The Celestine Prophecy, it talks about how children need the energetic attention of one person on them at all times. And if we were a village, as I believe we were intended to be as human animals, there would be aunties, there would be community, there would be grandpa that takes the baby from mama so she can actually heal and recover and make sense, and then brings that baby back to nurse or whatever it is. But there's a village of people energetically tending to this child. That is not something that we have had as the framework societally for parenthood in a very long time. And when I'm working with couples, what I often say is those first 2 years for a couple are when you are most vulnerable in your relationship to the ruptures that it feels really, really difficult to come back from. I don't know many couples that I've worked with where that first 2 years is not so destabilizing to the psyche of both the mother, the father, whatever the framework is, the parents, that it just feels like, in terms of the relationship, I had no idea it was going to feel like this, and this is not what I signed up for. And that's across the board. Meaning, I think for men, and this is what came up in the workshop this weekend, and, it was so beautiful. There was a young man there with his mother, and, just his open heart and willingness to be in the exploration of these concepts that we were talking about with masculine and feminine energetics and attachment energetics and all of these things. And it was really beautiful to see him, as I believe he was like 22, thinking about these things and how they're going to impact his relationship dynamics, but also as he sits next to his mother. And what I think is so interesting that I watch happen so often is that men go through a really difficult period after they have a baby, if we're speaking heteronormatively, because in a lot of ways, there's a lot of grief that is not spoken about for men, in that I had this idea that this baby would come and it would make us so much closer and our love for one another would just deepen. And most of the time, what I've experienced is it's a little bit different than what the man in the relationship anticipates, in that this woman is not only drowning in the level of what is being asked of her energetically. And so that's not, and there's so many beautifully present fathers that still feel this. My child's father is probably one of the most attuned, present, he's just the best dad. He truly is. And I think that level of like, what do I do? What do you need from me? That new fathers experience almost inevitably was present in our dynamic. And I think that it is so often the case because a woman is not only flooded with overwhelm and attempting to make sense of all of the cataclysmic shifts that are happening within her psyche, and then she's physically, emotionally drained, but also she's really in her masculine, right? In a way that can feel like we are sort of in this battle of the alphas that I talk a lot about with the couples that I work with, in that everything her partner does just feels like not the way I would do it. He feels really inept. She is sort of like, he's the person that is there to sort of project all of my energetic frustration onto. It's a tough time. And that young man I was telling you about, like his eyes got really wide as I was talking about this because he was saying, I very much want a family and want kids. And there's a lot about what you're saying, if I'm honest, that scares me. And I said, it's not that I want to scare you, but I think that if we don't have honest conversations about maybe some of the ways that we're not holding what a child coming into the dynamic between two people brings into the equation, then we're not really bringing our inner adult, yes, to the conversation around what this is relationally. And a lot of times, what I find, and this is the difficult thing to talk about, is even for the men in the relationship dynamics, what it actually requires is to go back and look at some of my own mother wounding and some of the ways that I defend against, big breath as I say this, seeing that I was somehow a challenge for my mother. It's not so much that you were the challenge for your mother, because that's not the case. It is that the parenting, the requirements, the structure of what family and how we've sort of set it up to not be really how we were intended to be in family dynamics, from my perspective, was challenging for a lot of mothers in ways that we just have never been honest about, right? Like there's all of these ways that, first it was mothers popping martinis, and then it was mothers getting through life with Xanax. And, nowadays it's sort of like mothers joke about how much wine they drink. And these are the things that couples and, women certainly talk to me about all the time, but I still, in the relationship space, don't hear a lot of coaches or therapists or people that talk about love and relationships talking about these kind of things. And I think it's important to talk about it, because when we don't, what we have is the villainization of someone like Ayesha Curry telling the truth about her felt experience of just wanting to be a fully embodied, expressive human soul in this lifetime as she came to be, and frankly, as is her unapologetic birthright to do and be. And then she becomes villainized, and somehow that means that she is not a good wife, and that her marriage should be on the rocks if it's not, and that it is disrespectful of her husband. And y'all, I call bullshit. Like that's problematic, and that's frankly childish. I said it because it's just like an unwillingness to be curious about, like, what am I not seeing here? What am I defending against seeing? That I think it's important for us to be able to talk about, because when we don't, what ends up happening in our relationship dynamics is we can't meet one another. And here's the thing, what ended up happening that I think, again, at the beginning of this conversation, starting to talk about, and I got a little sidetracked, is as the modern feminist movement made it possible in 1974, the date is always ingrained in my brain, because when I think about how recent that was in terms of history, that women were able to have their own bank accounts starting in 1974. You were able to get your own credit cards. You were able to make decisions for yourselves financially. Before that, you couldn't have those things. And if you think about what that meant about being a woman who decided not to be in partnership, or decided that a partnership was no longer safe and life affirming and what I wanted for myself, or my husband, my partner, wants children, and that is just not something either that is aligned for me or possible for me, or something that I truly desire, or I've had one child and the felt experience of it has made me realize that this isn't something that I want for myself again. One child was enough, or overwhelming, or, I have all of these children because I've had several, and while I love my kids, I feel like I'm drowning in this responsibility. All of these things are things that our mother's generation were not able to speak to safely because their survival, and I'm saying survival so intentionally, was intertwined with them being in this nuclear family framework, and that was by design. And brothers, with as much love as I can possibly muster, I want to say to you, it is not actually in support and love for the women in your lives in all forms: mothers, sisters, girlfriends, wives, all of the women in your life, friends, for you to be unwilling to be curious about that. Felt experience. It's not, if we can't see your mother as more than just the utilitarian object that gave birth to you, but that she was a fully, you know, developing and longing and all of the things that a human is. It kind of makes me emotional as a soul beyond just your mother. If you can't see and be curious about what her felt experience was, that is like the participation in these structures of dominance that you are sort of being complicit with, my love. And listen, we as women do it as well. And I'm not going to pretend like there weren't some comments directed at Aisha Curry from women. And, I say often, women are half of the population. These patriarchal structures could not continue to be perpetuated without our participation, but there is still a way that we have sort of been programmed to believe if a man is successful and giving you everything you want, then why would you want anything other than just to be Steph Curry's wife? And again, I think that's problematic. I think we really need to get on board with the way that life and the world is asking us to evolve in the ways that we are holding relationships and ourselves. And, a lot of that is this rise of the feminine consciousness, in that we are all being asked to integrate these aspects of our masculine and feminine, and that is our ability to collaborate and create and be in our soul space in alignment with who we came here to be, along with creating structures and being in mission and doing the things that are sort of the execution of these feminine aspects of ourselves. But our ability to dance with our masculine and our feminine really requires that we have honest conversations about what has made integrating these energetics within ourselves challenging up to this point. And to me, this thing around, the reckoning around how we have families and how we parent and what that looks like to do it from, a way that is not going to be so out of balance, is really important. And so, yeah, as I was reading those comments last night and sort of just feeling a little like, oof, this is a way that we're still not being very honest about some of the challenges around how we are all sort of complicit in these structures of dominance and disconnection from, I think, sometimes who we are in the intricacies of our souls and who we came here to be. And that is going to look really different for everyone, and that's okay. But I think so much of what to me is sort of the rise of the feminine consciousness and this shift from an external authority or blueprint telling you what it looks like to live a good life to an inner authority that I decide what is true and wise and beautiful for my own life requires that we have a lot more tolerance, excuse me, and grace for the ways that someone else's path, someone else's truth may be different from mine. Again, excuse me. And if I can't do that, therein lies my work. If I can't have tolerance for why someone else experiences life and work and the world and parenthood in a way that is different from the way that I have experienced it or what I have held to be true, if I can't tolerate that, there's something there. in my shadow for me to be curious about. And normally it's something historic in terms of the story I'm telling myself about my own life or my own childhood, or what my relationship with my parents, maybe my mother, was, that I'm a little bit hesitant to look at. But I'll tell y'all, if we don't start looking at it in terms of heterosexual relationship dynamics, I don't know that it's great for us. I think, there are already ways, and there's these gender wars that I'm just so obsessed with us putting down. But when I feel like you see me as less than fully human and just sort of the utilitarian object that is required for you to fulfill your legacy of the desire to be a parent, that actually is, I think, where we're going to be in that space of continuing to perpetuate the divide. And I don't want that, right? I don't want that for any of us. So I think it's really about us being curious about the felt experience of what this has felt like for you, and that I can tolerate hearing it, and it is in no way minimizing of me, right? So yeah, I just want us to name that. I think there's a lot about, and let me just say this very clearly. We've all been raised in these paradigms and conditioned to think these things are true. I don't actually fault my brothers at all for the ways that they have been wired to see women as utilitarian objects that, their purpose is in the perpetuating of the species on their behalf, and that's what they are. We're talking about like centuries of programming that we're attempting to unpack and unravel and, create some new ways of operating, some new pathways. And it's not going to be just like a quick, clear, oh yeah, totally get it. Like it takes some time. And I think we've got to hold a lot of compassion for ourselves and one another. And that I think there's this protect, provide, procreate template I talk about a lot that men are given, that I am just feeling so much more lately that I want more for our brothers. And it's not that you shouldn't want to be a parent or have people you protect and you provide for and you procreate with. Beautiful. Love that for you. And just like women are so much more than who they are as those objects that provide you with children, you are so much more than who you are providing for, brothers. And my dream for all men is to really come into right relationship with, who am I as a soul? What is the work that I came into this body to do beyond these roles that I've been societally conditioned to believe are where my worth resides? Because it's just not true for any of us. And I believe we are moving into a time where that is what we are being asked to be curious about more and more. And as we are being curious, there's so much about the reclamation of that time in history that I just feel like is the return of the witchification, certainly of women, but of all of us, right? And the witch is the energetic that is in alignment with nature and the wilderness and the wild within all of us. And the more that I need that to be tamed and one thing and a linear thing that I can understand, we're going to have a reckoning with that. I just know it. Women are not only like about to be so much more, because we already are, but I think the unapologetic taking up space as so much more is what I see on the horizon, certainly for women. But my dream is for our brothers to do and be that as well. Maybe step into their inner warlock more and more, right? Or whatever it is. So this morning, it's interesting. I pull a tarot card every morning from this deck, and I'm going to show you guys the deck if you're watching this on YouTube. And it's the Intuitive Night Goddess Tarot. This has been my, I have like a primary deck, and then I have several other decks that I pull from just throughout the day or based on like whatever's going on energetically. But this is my deck that I come back to as like my center, and I pull from at the beginning of the day. And I pulled this morning a card that just felt very in alignment with this Aries. Is it a full moon? Is it a new moon? I don't know. We have a moon, Dené. But there's a lot of like energy of like fiery, unapologetic. I'm not apologizing for taking up space with myself. That is, I think the moon is tomorrow. I should look. And with this, there's just so much of that like reclamation of that witch energy, right? And so it's a super moon, which it's a full moon. And so, yeah, it's a harvest moon. It's a like coming back for all of the things that I am claiming for myself and that I unapologetically know that I was meant to experience and be and stand in my power around. And there's so much of that energy right now. I'm certainly feeling it. I know all of you who are listening are feeling some of that energy. And the card that I pulled this morning, feels very much in line with that. And it's the witch. And this is traditionally in tarot, the magician. So here's the card. But I love that the witch is sort of synonymous, interchangeable with the magician because it becomes the reclamation of our magic. And, there was so much more that was lost in this thing of when we burned women alive and when we sort of pit one another against one another, not only in a gendered way, but certainly there's a lot of sister wounding within the witch wound. There's a lot of, lack of trust in masculinity that is intertwined in the witch wound. That so much of this, I believe, is what is being asked of us to heal right now. But we can't heal what we can't talk about. And if we can't talk about the complexity of our magic beyond just the roles that we've been so societally conditioned to play, we can't heal this stuff, right? And so I think in order to go back and reclaim our witch, we have to be able to talk about how we are these unbelievably beautiful, multifaceted beings that are so much more than any role that we play for one another or in society. And that actually has nothing to do with our love for one another. We've got to be able to hold more complexity than that, I guess is my point, you guys. So I'm going to read the write up for the witch. And the card says, this goddess stands upon a luscious altar of flowers and earth with all the elements and suits of the minor arcana before her. From left to right, the glowing pentacle is at her feet, representing the element of fire, a grounding energy, or that of financial, physical needs and security in this life. The coin is at her right foot, representing the energy she wants to welcome into her world. From her hand, a wand of light spills out. Descending to the earth, the wand represents the element of fire, spirituality, creativity, ideas, passion. This is the seed of any thought or action, how we bring our dreams into reality and how we tap into who we are and who we are becoming. Her hand is raised high because it is through our intuition and connection to the universe and the energy around us that we are best able to align ourselves with the power of the wands. In her other hand, she holds a glowing sword pointing towards the earth. The sword represents the element of air, action, decision, new ideas. This is where we begin to manifest and show ourselves to the world. The witch points downward, recognizing it as a tool to carve our way along our earthbound journey. The cup of light is at her left foot and represents the element of water, intuition, creativity, dreams, relationships, feelings. The cup contains the depths of our truest selves and is filled with the energy we have to connect with others. This represents what we are ready to let go of and what we are letting the universe know we want more of. Our witch, our mage, our goddess contains multitudes. Okay. She asks us to harness our inherent ability to find balance and transcend all of these elements to tap into her true power and magic. Once we understand the flow of energy, the progress of process, our abilities to manifest and mold, we can create and craft our worlds into the ones we want to see, the ones we see when we close our eyes and connect to our higher selves. Locate all of the resources before you and don't be afraid to wield them. Remember the mantra, as above, so below. There is no good or bad, but all is ebb or flow, represented by the infinity halo above our witch. This goddess understands the cycles of things, the planting of the seeds with wands, the watering of an idea or relationship with cups, the bringing into life of swords, and enjoying the abundance of harvest, enjoying the abundance and harvest of pentacles. Allow yourself to flow where you are and find your space in the magical cosmos. The keywords for this card are magic, manifestation, power, and action. I mean, just all feels so fitting with the supermoon. And was it Thoreau who said, I contain multitudes. Do I contradict myself? Yes, I do. Very well. I think it was Thoreau. Dené. But we contain multitudes. And I think, for me, what was such a game changer to be at a point in midlife in my late 30s, almost 40s, realizing that my marriage needed to change form and that so much of the cultural conditioning and paradigms I'd been raised in, I was being asked to call into question. And knowing that there was a way that society was going to view me in a certain way as a single woman with a child, which I say quite intentionally because I'm not a single mom. My child has an unbelievably present, active father, but that there are ways that I was going to be asked to get really conscious about how I wanted to hold myself, right? And that I could hold myself and see myself through the eyes of how society might view me, or I could see myself as someone who holds multitudes, and that I am a mother and I am have been a therapist, and I am someone who is an author and a seeker, but there's so many things that I am and that I came to experience, and that's an ever evolving, shifting, co-creating with the universe process. And that's all of us, but that's the reclamation of our feminine essence. And I just really believe this time in history is asking us to expand in our ability to be open to all that we are and all that is possible. And really that there is magic everywhere, for those who have eyes to see, right? So in terms of the podcast, I'm going to come back when it feels aligned and when it feels true. And that might be every week for a while. That might be, I'm traveling a little bit the next few weeks, so we'll see. But I feel proud of myself for allowing it to unfold as is true and aligned, and not putting too much pressure on myself that it has to be in a rigid container or box. Because again, that is the embracing of my feminine essence to me. So proud of myself for that. And I'm grateful to those of you, whoever you are listening, if you've made it to the end. Thank you for being with me with my raspy, snuffleupagus voice. And yeah, please utilize this moon. I'm not sure if I'm going to put this out before or after the moon, but the energy will still be alive in the air. Please utilize this moon to remember how powerful you are and to stand in it unapologetically, because what I have come to understand is we do life, those around us, the universe, ourselves, no favors by playing small. It's not actually what we came for. We came here to contain those multitudes, to express all of the plentiful aspects of our essence to the extremes. And I think that is what life is asking all of us to really feel like we can titrate into doing in a way that we've been preparing for. So it's that thing of like, it is safe to be yourself in a way that maybe it hasn't felt safe previously. It is going to be safe to be you. So please do that. Please know that that is your greatest service to humanity, to show up as that self that you are. I love you very much. Thank you for your listening, for your presence, for allowing me to show up as myself and express some of these thoughts that have been sitting on my heart. So hopefully I will see you again. Be well.